She can barely hold a job, my mother told the court. I didn't argue. The Chief Justice rose, smoothed his robe, and said, "She's been holding a family together. Let the record show." The last time I saw my mother inside a courtroom, before the day she swore to tell the truth about me, she was paying a parking ticket in cash and telling the clerk a story about church that made the fee go down $5. She has a gift for rearranging rooms. I used to think that was power. It is. It just isn't the kind that keeps people fed. My name is Leah. 31, first-generation college grad, second-generation optimist, child of a high school custodian who loved People magazines, and a mother who could cook a feast from a pantry that looked like it had given up. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a duplex that smelled like Comet and winter coats. My dad, Ray, fixed things and wore the same boots for 12 years. My mom, Darlene, could be warm as soup and cold as the bowl if you asked the wrong question. We were the family people said, bless their hearts, about when we made the paper for the Christmas drive. Then I got a library card and decided to read my way out. The first time I said, I want to be a lawyer, my mom laughed into a sink full of suds and said, try for secretary first, baby. She said it kindly, like a nurse handing you a smaller pill when you choke on the bigger one. My dad didn't say anything. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and brought me a broken toaster to take apart. I held a lot of jobs on the way to law school. Some of them didn't stick. I was a barista for 3 months until I realized the owner was paying cash under the table and not reporting hours. I left and reported it and then learned how to dodge the place on my bike. I worked at the mall, selling cell phones until I stood up to a manager who doctored credit applications. He fired me and told people I wasn't a fit. I cleaned offices at night, babysat the neighbors' twins, stocked shelves at a drugstore, and answered phones at a doctor's office that called every patient sweetie, like we were in a sitcom. I told myself job hopping was a symptom of being young and broke and someone who couldn't stand next to bad rules without catching fire. My mother told me it was a symptom of me. Can barely hold a job, she would say on the phone to her sister, forgetting I was in the doorway with a bag of groceries. Gets that from Ray, she'd add, which wasn't fair. My dad held his job until his knees said no. At 22, I took the LSAT with a pencil I brought from the house I still shared with my parents because you can't always afford to move out at the same time you're trying to move up. I studied in the bathtub when my mother had friends over because the one place she left me alone was behind a locked door. I scored better than I'd let myself imagine. A state school said yes. A small scholarship said, not all of it, but enough. My dad hugged me so hard I could smell his whole life. My mother told me not to forget where I came from. I didn't. I just didn't want to stay there forever. Law school is a machine that asks for everything and then says more, please. I gave it my days. I gave my nights to work, research assistant in the library stacks, weekend cashier at the food co-op, babysitter to Professor Hart's neurodivergent 9-year-old who taught me more about contracts than the class did. Mother did not like the way my calendar looked when I wrote it down for her. People who are stable have one job, she said. Not 4? People who are broke have several, I said. And she sniffed like I'd said, drug dealer. I carried her voice into every interview. Can barely hold a job lived under my collarbone like a tattoo. I stayed too long at internships where men interrupted me to see if I'd snap, and I left early from places where I snapped, and then apologized because women with my hair and my accent are expected to be grateful, not useful. I graduated 30 credit hours into debt and 60 credit hours into a habit of saying, I'm sorry, before hello. My dad got sicker the summer before the bar exam. His knees weren't the problem anymore. His hands were. They shook when he tried to button his shirt and when he tried to drink his coffee and when he tried to hide it from my mother because he knew what she would say. You look pitiful, Ray, she said, and then, softer when she had sung that song enough times to hear herself. I'm scared. I postponed the bar exam until February. I did it like a practical person, an adult who knows you don't sprint toward a career while your father is trying to open a bottle. I worked at the courthouse for a temporary judge who called me counselor when he was in a good mood, which was enough to make me forget he called me kid the rest of the time. I took my dad to neurology appointments and learned the secret code for getting a parking voucher approved when the clerk was drafted by a laugh. My mom didn't come to the neurology appointments. The waiting rooms made her mean. Doctors have always liked to make money off poor people, she'd say, and I'd point out that these particular doctors seem to like the research posters more than our copay. You always take the other side, she'd say, not hearing the irony of a future lawyer being told to stop doing the thing she was training for. On the February morning I took the bar, it snowed. Ohio snow is thick as memory and rude. I wiped salt off my boots at the testing center and told myself that I was not auditioning to be a hero. I was auditioning to be a person whose bills got paid on time. I answered the essay question about negligence and thought about my mother's habit of putting piping hot pans directly on the laminate counter. I filled in bubbles and thought about my father trying to sign his name without his hand telling on him. I finished the second MBE session and washed my face in the bathroom with a paper towel because I was sweating like a person who had not given herself permission to eat lunch. I passed. The letter came on a Thursday. My mother didn't post about it on Facebook. My father stuck it on the fridge with a magnet that said Columbus Clippers, even though he hadn't been to a game in 3 years, because he said the chairs made him feel like a gerbil. In Ohio, the bar admission ceremony takes place in the Supreme Court courtroom itself. It is gold and echo and wood. If you have ever been poor in a place like that, you understand what it is to feel like a mistake and a miracle at the same time. You also know that the people who sit on the bench wear robes not because they're important, but because you have to hide your ordinary clothes sometimes to say hard things with a straight face. Character and fitness is what they call the part where a committee decides if you're someone who can hold other people's futures in your hands without letting your own unsolved problems soak the papers. It's not dramatic for most people. You submit the forms, the references, the credit report, and your ex-boyfriend's mother asks her brother, the pastor, to say something nice in case the committee calls. My file wasn't simple. There were the job changes. There were the months when my student loan deferments had barely made it under the wire. There was the part where I'd been a witness in a domestic violence case for a neighbor, and the defense lawyer had tried to make me say I was angry by nature because I didn't smile the whole time. The committee asked for a character and fitness hearing. It won't be like TV, my mentor, Professor Hart, said, but it won't be nothing. I wore a black suit with a brave collarbone. Jason held my hand on the way in. My father sat in the second row with a tie that had penguins on it because he understands symbolic armor. My mother sat next to him with a face that looked like she was being polite to a neighbor whose dog barked during her daytime shows. They called my name. I walked to the table, sat between Yvette, my attorney, the one whose bar number lives in my phone like a talisman, and a microphone that looked like the kind you only ever see in rooms where someone tries very hard to sound official. The committee asked about the barista job, the mall, the doctor's office. The pattern concerns us, one man said, who looked like he had met his wife during a debate about whether or not to use the phrase, for said reason, in a wedding vow. The pattern concerns me too, I said. I learned something every time, and what I learned is that I can't stay in places that break rules I'm supposed to pretend not to see. They asked about my money. I told them I had been late on one bill when my father got worse. I told them I'd paid it, and I handed them a sheet of paper that showed the bill, the late fee, the payment, and the letter I'd written to the collections agency quoting the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, because I am the kind of social worker who grows into the kind of lawyer who quotes statutes for fun. Then came the part that had sparked every whisper I could hear in my own head. We received a letter, the chair said, from a person identifying herself as your mother. He looked sorry he was saying it, like someone who gets to be a dentist on days when he would rather have been a teacher. Darlene stood up on her own, without waiting to be called as a witness. She has never in her life waited to be called. She can barely hold a job, she said, and I felt the courtroom go quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows insult, the kind that follows a coil releasing. The coil had been my neck. She jumps from place to place, my mother said. She thinks she's better than us. She wants to be a lawyer, but lawyers need to be steady. She quits. She lifted her chin and looked at the panel like they were the ones who needed proof. I'm her mother. I would know. There are moments in which it is possible to become your worst self with a single syllable. I could have. I could have said, "You quit me first," which is what it felt like when she had made Sunday dinners into competitions and birthdays, into an accounting of who spent what on whose feelings. I could have said, "Your job-holding method was to show up and talk until people believed you," which was true and unkind, and would have broken something I was trying very hard to hold. Gently, I didn't say any of that. I looked at the chair, then at Yvette, then at the Chief Justice, the one who presides over this ceremony with a gravity that makes you forget he is just a person from Chillicothe who once wanted to be a baseball player like everyone else. He sat there with his hands folded, the white of his collar peeking out of his robe like a small mercy. "May I respond?" I asked. "Of course," the chair said. "And Miss Gallagher," he added, mangling our last name in a way that somehow made it easier to breathe. "We'll ask you to sit." "My mother didn't sit. Mrs. Gallagher," the Chief Justice said, very gently but in a tone that made the air follow instructions. "Please have a seat." She sat. I turned back to the panel. "The truth is, I've had a lot of jobs," I said. "I have left places that were wrong. I have stayed in places that needed a person like me who can stand up to the wrong thing and not burn down the whole kitchen. I have also been the person who goes home after her shift, helps her father get into his pajamas, fills her mother's freezer, then wakes up and does it again." I took a breath. I can hold a job. I was holding too many. I slid a folder. Across the table. Receipts. Capital R. Letters from supervisors who kept their promises. Pay stubs. A list of dates and duties for every place I'd worked that showed what it looks like when loyalty is a verb, not a posture. The Chief Justice glanced at the chair. The chair glanced at the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice stood up. He didn't have to. That's what made it important. "She's been holding a family together," he said, voice resonant enough to hit the wood in a way that made my father straighten his penguins. "She's been working, studying, and caregiving. She's been honest about what she owes and what she doesn't. The court doesn't punish hustle. We punish dishonesty. I see none." He turned to my mother. "Ma'am," he said, and the whole room leaned forward because there is nothing quite like a justice calling your mother ma'am. "Character and fitness concerns whether your daughter can uphold the law. It does not measure her ability to metabolize a lifetime of being your daughter." For the first time that day, my mother looked ashamed. Shame is a word I don't use lightly. Shame is gasoline. Shame is a key, too, if you don't make a habit of turning it. The chair cleared his throat. "Thank you, Justice," he said. "Ms. Gallagher, your file reflects a life of work and some hard choices. We are satisfied with your responses." He shuffled his papers in the way that means not, "I'm bored," but "We are nearing the end of this particular possibility of harm." A few questions later, the chair said what he was allowed to say. A conditional yes. "We are recommending admission," he said, "pending completion of your oath." The afternoon was the ceremony you see on alumni postcards and think is staged. It's not. It's cornball and true. People wear suits they bought for weddings, bring parents who cry onto lapels, and pretend not to check their phones mid-oath for texts from bosses who want to know when you can be at the office to bill the first minute of your new life. The justices enter in a line. The Chief Justice jokes about baseball and beginnings. They call names. You walk up. You hold your hand up and your breath in. When they called mine, I felt my knees like scaffolding. I thought I might fall. I thought that would be appropriate. I took the oath. The Chief Justice shook my hand and said, "Go do good," which is what I carved into my throat for later. Back in the lobby, my mother hugged me. It was awkward. She smelled like white diamonds and complaint. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," she said into my shoulder. "I just want them to know who you are." "You wanted them to know who you think I am," I said. "I need you to know who I am now." Then I said the thing I had promised myself I would say without apology, because that was the whole point of loving anyone at all. "Mom, if you ever malign me in public again, I will see you less. I won't punish you. I'll protect myself." She opened her mouth. I saw the old notes rising. My father put his hand on her wrist and she closed it. "I'm proud of you," she said, and I believed 80% of it, which, from her, is a windfall. We took photos, me with my father and his penguins, me with Yvette, who kissed my forehead and said, "Welcome," me with Jason, who looked like a person you can spend 4 decades with and not regret a single Easter. My mother held my elbow and did not steer me. I counted that as a sacrament. Work is not a melodrama. The first year out was documents and mistakes and mentorship. I took a job with the public defender's office because I wanted to talk to the people who always look like they just walked into someone else's living room and found the lights had been left on. My first client was a man who stole allergy medication to sell to buy diapers. "They're not diapers," the prosecutor said. "They're excuses." And I said, "The police report lists the brand." And the judge said, "Arraignment. In 2 weeks?" And the guy's mother cried in the hallway and told me I was a baby. I lost cases. I won a few. I learned to sleep 6 hours when my body wanted to sleep 0. I learned to say, "I can't be your therapist," to clients who wanted me to be. I learned to say, "I can't be your scapegoat," to my mother when she wanted me to be. I sent her money for groceries sometimes. I did not send a photo of my paycheck the first time my take-home beat the rent by more than 100. The first time she called to brag about me, it was because an aunt had texted her a link to a story about my work representing tenants who got scammed by a landlord who thought he was a god. "My daughter's the lawyer in that," she said, and I could hear her smile do something I hadn't heard it do since she used to cut my sandwiches into triangles. 2 summers later, my father fell. He hit the kitchen linoleum with a Marvel movie thud. The paramedics knew our house by then. They had been gentle and quick with our rhythms. My mother yelled. I told her to breathe. She told me to stop telling her how to breathe in her own kitchen. At the hospital, a resident told us the words we had been tiptoeing around. Hospice. My mother looked at me and thought, no. I looked at my father and thought, gift. We did both. We brought him home with a bed that turned him, with a lever, an aide with hands like instruction, and a window that knew how to hold morning. When he died, my mother screamed once and then put a washcloth on her own face and sat on the floor next to the bed like someone waiting for a bus. The week after, my mother stood at his funeral and told a story about how he'd once driven to Kentucky for a specific kind of pie I liked when I was 12. She's my girl, she said. And that was all. It was a sentence you might not notice if you are not me. If you are me, it is a building permit. Grief didn't make. My mother knew. It made her tender. That's different. The year after my father died, she called me to bear witness to things that used to embarrass her. I paid the water bill myself today. I asked the neighbor to carry the bags. I told your aunt to stop commenting on my body. I gave her the care plan I make for clients who have lost someone. 3 new routines, 1 human who knows you well, 1 thing you can do with your hands every day that reminds your body you can be here now. She chose Thursday walks with the neighbor, Wednesday coffee at the diner where they call her Miss Darlene again like she matters, and a jigsaw puzzle she refuses to let me help with because lawyer hands don't know when to sit still. 1 morning, nearly 3 years to the day after the Chief Justice stood up for me. I stood up for a kid who had no one. He had robins in his file, the little red tabs they put on children's documents when they want you to know there's blood in there. He was quiet. The prosecutor had no patience for quiet. The judge had no patience for anything. I asked the court to let him into a program that required him to tell the truth about what he wanted. The judge looked bored. The prosecutor smirked. Then, from the gallery, a woman cleared her throat the way moms do when they believe in you. And no, you might not. It was mine. She had come to watch me do my job. She can hold a job, my mother said to the clerk in the hallway later, loud enough for me to hear her. She holds the whole room. Sometimes that's all you get. Sometimes that's more than enough. When I think about the day in the courtroom, the thing people always want to talk about is the Chief Justice. His line makes good essay. It has rhythm. It gives you something to tell your friends at dinner. Here's the part I don't want you to miss. His standing up mattered because I had already decided to stand up for myself. The plan matters because plans hold when compliments leak like air out of a tire you keep meaning to get patched. If you're reading this because someone told you you're a quitter and you suspect you are actually a person who survives, here is what I wish someone had told me sooner. Make a folder labeled Proof. Print the receipts. Write the plan. Practice. 1 sentence. I matter. I'm changing how I show up. Say it in rooms with wood and rooms with linoleum. When someone tells you not to pretend you matter, they are telling on their fear. Yours is not the only life that will change when you stop pretending. It might be the first one that gets better. The last time I saw the Chief Justice, he was at a community event cutting a ribbon for a legal aid clinic that my office helped fund. He remembered my name. He remembered my father's penguin tie. "How's your mom?" he asked, and I said, "Learning," which is the most generous verdict I know how to write for her. At Christmas, my mother put a photo on the fridge. Me in my black suit the day of my swearing in, my father in that tie, my mother's hand. On my elbow, not steering me, May 13th, written in Sharpie on the margin. She taped a little note next to it, her neat church secretary hand still useful. Leah matters. She does not pretend.